everybody. Welcome to this first meeting of 2019, and it's great to see some numbers. Oh, it says it's red.
It is red, sir.
Am I? Oh, this one's easy to click. Sorry. There ought to be a badge on it. You know, it's a 1 inch or no inch microphone. Anyway, here we are. I hope that's better. Good. Just one or two things, some good news really, which I want to share with you. We had a committee today, and in the recent edition of Resurrection, we sent out an invitation to members to make a voluntary donation. I'm very pleased to say we've had an excellent response, which was good to hear. And only to say, if you don't get Resurrection, or you saw this as an opportunity to close the loop, as one gentleman already has done today, everybody very welcome. But it greatly encourages us in supporting the work of the organisation. So thanks to all those who've given. Now, the speaker needs no introduction. I feel we are lucky in this society to have real experts of the field, both on the committee and available to us. And it speaks for itself, the size of the audience, just Simon's, the eminence of which, and reference always which he's held in this field. So I'm going to say no more at this stage, but pass over to him to conduct a lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If an expert is a grip under pressure, I hope I squirm. So our agenda for today, so to speak, it's centred my talk on Ferranti computers and Ferranti Limited in the period of the early 50s. After dealing with the family of computers, we'll deal with one case study, a computer that went to GCHQ Cheltenham, and then a few personal anecdotes, and finally one or two end effects, including, I hope, a bit of a film sequence. So, a family of 9 Ferranti Mark1 and Mark1 star computers. Here they are. You'll notice on the left-hand side that the first 2 machines were Mark1, and the rest were Mark1 star, or the augmented version. More of that later. If you follow the dates, the delivery dates, you see a whole cluster of apparently more or less simultaneous deliveries here, and that thereby hangs a tale. The production and the formal contracts to deliver computers got a bit out of hand owing to machinations at the Ministry of Defence, and more of that later. And if you are a Ferranti man and you look at serial numbers, then these first 2 run in order. Then the next 4 or so are muddled up and not in the order I give them there. And then the final ones are in order. And again, you'll notice quite a gap before the delivery of the final one in October 1957, which is as much as to say that by then Ferranti were having a hard job selling this particular brand of computer, but the company had gone on to other things in the meantime. Most of these were funded either directly or indirectly by government of one sort or another. The one I pick out that is not is the one that went to Shell Labs in Amsterdam, where that was the first computer, I think anywhere, the first computer to be financed directly as a commercial venture by a company without any direct or indirect government subsidy. And that, as I said, was ordered in 1952, delivered in 54. Running down these sites here, the first 2 obviously academic, and GCHQ speaks for itself. The Armaments Research and Development Establishment at Fort Halstead is to do with guns, basically, and those sort of things. DINAC is the, I remember the Italian, but it's something like the Istituto Nazionale per Applicazioni Calculator. In other words, an institute for doing things with numerical calculation, and it's a division of the Italian National Research Council. Then there's the atomic weapons establishment at Aldermaston, and two aircraft companies, aerospace companies at the end. Some of these computers had in-house names, and we'll meet one of them, Cleopatra, later on. I don't think I want to say anything more about the list itself. So perhaps to point out the variety of switch-off dates, and you'll see that a couple of these machines, 2 or 3 of these machines in particular, the Port Halstead one, lasted quite a while at their sites. And again, I'll say something about that in a moment. So where did it all begin? This sequence of 9 machines didn't spring fully formed out of the ground, as probably everybody here knows. They were based on prototypes developed at Manchester University. Most people will have heard of a small-scale experimental machine called the Baby, which burst into life on the 21st of June 1948 at Manchester. What we're looking at here is an enhanced version, longer word length, etc., that was operational in June 49. And I just pointing out the this is where the RAM, the random access memory was, and in its particular case, it was of a novel electrostatic storage system based on cathode ray tubes that rejoiced in the names of its twin inventors, really, sometimes called a Williams tube, perhaps more appropriately a Williams-Kilburn tube, after 2 academics involved. And then there's a magnetic drum out of picture behind all this. This afternoon I want to leave the academics largely out of it, because they have their audience, they have their publications, and some of you must be sick and tired of hearing about Manchester University, so, where everything stops. So we'll march swiftly on and turn to Ferranti's factory at Moston, about 3 miles to the north-east of the university, where the company was given a big grant by the Minister of Supply to produce a production version of the university prototype. And whereas the university prototype, you will recall, had bundles of wires hanging from the ceiling and was thoroughly sort of unsanitary. This machine was made of stuff. Perhaps some may say too stuffed. These logic doors were on heavy castings, but then when you recall that 3 of the computers were shipped to various parts of the world, and when they got there were, in 2 cases, hauled by a crane up to a 3rd floor window, it's probably a good thing that the construction was so stout. So the first commercial version, the first production version, went to Manchester University itself in a specially designed new building, small building, called the Computing Machine Laboratory. And there's a picture of the machine, or part of the machine, that is to say, at Manchester University. This is one of the end of one of 2 large racks of computing equipment, each about 16 feet long. Here's the user's display console and the paper tape input and output station. Here's the famous photograph of that same computer with Alan Turing leaning on the console there, and a couple of Ferranti engineers, Pollard and Lonsdale, at the console. That photograph was taken in early July 1951, just before the inaugural conference of that machine and it's one of several photographs taken with similar poses. In this position, there's another shot with Tom Kilburn there, and yet another photograph with John Bennett from Ferranti there. And those are the only three that I know of publicity shots. But in my mind, the triumvirate, Turing and Kilburn and John Bennett, says a lot about the collaborations, maths, engineers, industry, that went into this family. It's interesting that FC, Professor Williams, didn't have his photograph taken. Knowing him, I think he was far too busy and just didn't want to be involved in publicity. But it's a shame, even so, that we don't have a picture of him leaning on the console. The bit in the bottom there is a quote from a lecture FC gave in August 1949 at the Canadian Atomic Energy Establishment at Chalk River. And the little bit there that I want to emphasise is how to FC and presumably other engineers at the time, the big puzzle, as far as they're concerned, was how to get a program into the machine in the first place and start it running. So it was Turing who came along with the idea, well, first of all, of a bootstrap, which would suck in your main program. But secondly, he devised a system of input based on 5-bit teleprinter characters that packed nicely into a 40-bit word, a 20-bit instruction, and made life infinitely easier than entering a program manually through keys and looking at the result on a cathode ray tube screen. Of course, a lot of other things flowed from that observation of Turing's, but as far as machine code programming of this computer was concerned, for some years it didn't advance beyond binary, really, backwards binary at that, because it was arranged that the information, as seen by the programmer, was in backwards binary, a la engineering way, because time goes from the least significant bit progressing in a serial machine to the most possible, most significant end. Again, swiftly let's pass over that and talk about the device itself. If the word had been invented, I guess this would be called a supercomputer. There's a lot of it, which weighs a lot. In terms of its functional specification, basic hardware performance, there's nothing particularly out of the ordinary compared with other similar machines of the time. If anything, this clock speed of 100 hertz was very, very conservative, shall I say, and reflected at the time Williams' feeling that you shouldn't, if you wanted a reliable machine, you shouldn't push the technology too much. I think in terms of contemporary machines, perhaps those two things that I've outlined would have appealed to people looking round in 1951 for what computer to put practical problems on. First of all, the backing store, the directly accessible store, was quite large, 16K, I mean not large to us clearly, but quite large at that time. And the fact that the architecture involved index registers was of interest, especially to the scientific programming community. Where were these 9 Mark1 and Mark1 star machines delivered to? Well, 3 of them went abroad, as we saw in the first slide. The others were clustered round about England. I'm afraid Wales and Scotland at that point, nothing. This is Fort Halstead, ARDE in Kent, and obviously Aldermaston, many will remember where that is if you marched to it sheltered quite clearly. The cluster here represents Ferranti's factory, the university, and one of the users not at Ambrose at Chatterton. If Ferranti had a customer and they wanted to show, demonstrate a working machine, Ferranti itself didn't own the machine, and furthermore there was nothing to speak of in the southeast of England, where one would expect the purchasing power of companies to reside. So this was a bit of a problem, and those who know Ferranti history will know that by the mid-50s, Ferranti had set up a computing centre in London. It was originally planned to install a Mark1 computer there, but in the event, it was a Pegasus, probably wisely so, by the mid-50s. We should complete the picture by mentioning other centres of activity. Who would I be if I didn't mention Cambridge? So there are a whole cluster of machines in and near London, and there was one at TRE Malvern. To put names to all these prototypes going on at the same time. Here is a list of some 7 prototypes, and the colour coding is that the solid blue horizontal lines represent realistic hardware design activity, and then the red lines represent a working machine on which you could run programs. And the little diamonds, in the case of those designs that ran through to commercial products, they represent the first commercially available production computer from each company. And you can see that the Ferranti Mark1 that was delivered in February 1951 is marked there. Lions Leo computer, the first Lions was an in-house machine that clearly did good work, but was not turned into a product, Leo 2, until some time later. And indeed, there was a kind of golden 4 or so years gap between the first Ferranti delivery and the first delivery of any other company. And when I say any other company, there weren't any American or overseas computers delivered to the UK in that time zone. The first IBM machine was arrived in this country in October 56, I believe. Of course, the Manchester computer, the Ferranti computer, was quite expensive as computers go, and some of the products from other manufacturers there, particularly BTM, that was perhaps a third of the price, but also not so big as Ferranti. Other products, the Leo 2 was more expensive, and so was the Elliott 405, depending upon configuration. Well, I don't really want to talk about all the rest. I want to talk about Ferranti, its efforts to sell these things. And Ferranti acquired in Vivian Bowden its first computer salesperson. Bowden, an interesting character, a Cambridge physics PhD. During the war he worked on radar TRE, including an attachment for some time in the States, working on IFF. After the war, he was a consulting partner with Watson Watt until he joined Ferranti in 1953. After Ferranti, he went to be the principal at UBIS, the Manchester College of Science and Technology. He was created a life peer in '63 and became briefly a minister in the Wilson government. Here are 3 quotes from a letter he wrote in 1953, looking back on his 3 years as a salesman. Really, you don't have to read them all, but the first thing was to determine how many beyond about one of these computers would be required by the nation. The second paragraph just says that he interviewed a lot of people, both in the UK and in North America and in Europe. And the third is to say that he encountered some suspicion, some reticence, even from the scientific community, whose budgets were sometimes either too small or far too large to put on a computer. And when they did find it suitable program, was the machine able to work for long enough, and were the mathematicians able to develop the program in a finite time. So, as it says there at the bottom, Bode's principal observation was that there was a bit of a software crisis, and we'll go on later to explain what he did about it. What was the market driver? Well, remember we're talking about a period, post-war period of some stress for the United Kingdom. The Martin Act of 1946 cut off UK scientists from atomic weapons development. Then in 1948, two things happened. There was the Berlin airlift, and then on the 29th, I think, of October 48, came Black Friday. Black Friday for the cryptanalysts was the time when they suddenly ceased to have access to the Soviet Union encoded messages, because the Soviet Union had dramatically changed their coding system. In 49, well, you remember HMS Amethyst and that sort of thing, China, communism, and 1950, start of the Korean War, 51, sterling crisis and run on the pound. So life was hard. Nevertheless, the MOD's strategy was, first of all, to get the atomic weapons program underway, for which huge amounts of hydrodynamic calculation were required. And then GCHQ, after some uncertainty, which I'll deal with later, they suddenly became the highest priority MOD-related customer, and that accounts for some of the jumble up of delivery dates that we saw a few slides ago. It's interesting, this remark from Jerry Morgan, GCHQ, on the uncertainty with which these digital computers were regarded, even though at the time of making that remark, GCHQ were on the verge of ordering one. So let's, without more delay, go into this case study. And I'm indebted for the material here to the GCHQ historian Tony Comer. I spent 3 years trying to coax him to release documents, and eventually he was able to release a limited set of redacted documents, and the story I'm now going to tell is full of guesses, but please accept it as my best guess so far. I've chosen in this slide to lump together the American and British efforts to work towards the use of general purpose stored program computers, and to show that the Americans were in the lead. Lieutenant Commander James Pendergrass of the US Navy's security system produced a report hard on the heels of the Moore School lectures in University of Pennsylvania, saying that the security services ought to go into digital computing. And the Navy aspect of the US security set about a contract with the company Engineering Research Associates that eventually led to a computer called Atlas, and the Army side of the security system produced a computer that was eventually Admiral. To give further background to this, The United States security systems, the cryptanalysts, had made much use of punch card equipment during war, much more use indeed than Bletchley Park. So I guess they were thinking more in terms of digital general purpose computers. As far as I can determine, the first inkling of a move towards the use of these computers on the part of GCHQ was a report of January 1950 written by Jack Good, I.J. Good. Some may remember that I.J. Good was one of 3 people who joined the maths department at Manchester directly after the war under Professor Max Newman. Jack Good left Manchester in April 1948, but while he was there, he was the one of those 3 mathematicians who, to my mind, really struggled to put down on paper what he thought would be at least the general block diagram of the digital computer, working mostly on the information coming out of the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton. Anyway, let's not dwell on the details of this research, but to say that as far as GCHQ was concerned, the next visible move was sending a contingent to Manchester for the inaugural conference of Mark1, and then finally, in November 1951, a Ferranti Mark1 star was ordered, and GCHQ discussed with the company certain modifications that it wanted to happen to a machine. Meanwhile, the Athens computer burst into operation, and shortly after was Adna. And one of GCHQ's policies at the time was to request permission that their mathematicians should have a go at using the American computers to gain some experience, which, as far as I know, they did. So after some delay, Cheltenham gets a computer, and it had some initial use, attachments were made, and the full operation of the system that went under the name Cleopatra happened in 1955. Cleopatra didn't last for long. It was fairly shortly superseded by a much more prevalent computer called the Univac 1103A. Lest you think that GCHQ have been doing nothing in the intervening years, let me assure you that there was a lot of what's called rapid analytical machines being used of those immediate post-war years. I give the name of a few, and some of them had particularly rapid performance at the specific task for which they were built. And some of these characteristics greatly outshone anything that general purpose computers could provide at the time. Also, another branch of GCHQ dealing with our own community security was looking at hardware random number generators for one-time pads, and finally there was some work on use of digital computers for detecting direction finding, locking onto signals and plotting the position of potentially hostile transmission. These next 2 slides I give in the pale blue background to emphasise even more my uncertainty about what they are. These 2 photographs were released without comment, and I believe them to be a couple of peripheral units under construction for the Mark1 star. Again, I know not what programs were run on the Mark1 star. That information hasn't been released, except for 2 fairly anodyne programs. One is to investigate whether the number is a primitive root of the type of prime number, and the second is to do with some help for operators of a British cipher machine in putting in their initial settings. Looking at the Atlas Adna programs, most of them seem to be statistical in nature. and I just give the brief description. I know nothing else of these programs, nothing has been released, but clearly digital computers would be of some use for that sort of thing. Finally, to go back to the technologies, a brief comparison of Ferranti Mark1 Star with the two American machines. And it's interesting, all these three machines, in a sense, started from the ideas coming out of the EDVAC report and John von Neumann's writing of it. The Ferranti and the Atlas computer were definitely in the flavour of the Institute for Advanced Study machine at Princeton, whereas this was not. This was more in the flavour of the eventual EDVAC and the SEAC machines, etc. Only one thing further to say, and that is that the Atlas machine had one or two special commands tailored to the needs of the cryptanalysts. And here's one of them. In a single instruction, two streams of characters would be sucked into the main computer, comparison tests done on groups of characters from the stream, the number of coincidences counted, and this count preserved, and then significantly one stream would be restored in memory, slightly offset from its original starting position, and then if you know anything about Colossus, you can visualize that those two streams would then be put through the computer again. So such orders, I'm told, were of a lot of help to the cryptanalysts. And if you look at further specially tailored digital computers built by IBM, etc., for the security services, you can see this flavour of order up here. Phew, so enough of guessing about what happened at Cheltenham. And now for some, I hope a bit of light relief, one or two personal anecdotes from sort of interesting people who lived and worked around various copies, various Ferranti installations. And we'll start with a couple of people who started life in Manchester. The dates, by the way, are the date at which the individual first came across a stored program, general purpose digital machine. So starting with Audrey Bates and Cicely Popplewell, I have no satisfactory picture of either of them, so instead, why not stare at this aerial view of a begrimed Manchester University in about 1956 or so. Points to note, this little blob here was where the very first university prototype worked. Here was the adjacent new computing machine lab, and then in 1954, a brand new electrical engineering department was created here, and the computer moved across. Cicely Popplewell moved with the machine. She was the mainstay of the university's computing service right up to the mid-60s, and indeed, thanks to Cicely, I wrote my first program for a Mercury computer. So she was a stalwart, she would say. Audrey Bates started off, I suppose you might guess, if you looked at her track record, as a bit more of a high flyer for a first-class maths degree. She was Turing's first research student. The title of her thesis was, it was something like on a problem in, on the mechanical solution of a problem in Church's lambda calculus. She completed her MSc in October 1950 and went straight to Ferranti. Why? Well, one of the reasons is she said that Professor Max Newman said to her, "Oh no, Miss Bates, nobody will ever get a PhD involving computers." So it was Ferranti's game Audrey stayed at the West Gorton, at the Boston factory until 1952, when she went over to Canada with the computer delivered there, stayed there, married a Ferranti engineer, spent all her working life in the North American computing industry. The next on the list, a Canadian, Trixie Worsley. Obviously I didn't know her, but she comes through as a significant pioneer of North American computing. She joined the University of Toronto when there was their computing lab was just based on punch card machines. The university was thinking of building its own computer, and one of the subsidiary actions was to send Trixie and a colleague to Cambridge to get a PhD. Hartree was her supervisor, but very quickly Turing became involved. We don't know how, but Trixie and Turing struck up a correspondence, and Trixie spent some time in Manchester before returning to Toronto due to ill health in the middle of her PhD. She finished her PhD and was there in Toronto when the Ferranti Mark1 computer arrived there, and she was the one who gave it the nickname Ferrut, which I understand is pronounced Ferret, which obviously stands for Ferranti at the University of Toronto. And she helped Christopher Strachey, who was there soon after the machine was delivered, with some system software, and particularly she helped him with the St. Lawrence Seaway calculations. Now let me explain. To connect the Great Lakes to the North Sea for ocean growing. How right you are! Thank you. Okay, to connect with the ocean for reasonable sized vessels demanded a lot of sort of strengthening, widening, diversion, canal work. And the Americans and Canadians have been arguing about the route for years and years. One of the stumbling blocks was that the Canadians wanted the scheme to incorporate some hydroelectric storage systems and generators. And the Americans, I believe, were rather cagey about the siting of this, etc. So the Canadians decided, with the help of NRDC and the Brits essentially in the background, that the right way out of this impasse was for Canada to propose a route and do all the calculations and present the Americans with all the possible solutions of the chosen one. The job of the so-called backwater calculations was formidable. There were nearly 100 possible routes at various parts in the whole project, and each one had to be investigated, amount of rock and soil to be shifted, the data tape for all of these 100 cases, if the data tapes were stretched end to end, would occupy a tape of length 2.5 kilometres, and the programme was some 2,000 instructions long. The principal man behind that was Christopher Strachey, on loan from NRDC, but he had help from Trixie Worsley and indeed from Cicely Popplewell. So in a sense, it's the seaway calculations where Trixie got her spurs and attained some prominence locally, and she followed that up with a detailed and long program whose purpose was to compute atomic wave functions using the Hartree-Fock formulation, and that was of some significance, I understand. Then with a colleague, she designed transcode, which was a kind of primitive high-level language for the Mark I. It was not the same as Tony Booker's autocode. It was less sophisticated than that. But it was based on four-letter mnemonics for the common arithmetic functions the common standard functions, print, loop, etc., and gained some use in Canada. And sadly, Trixie died at the age of 51 from heart complications. The next pair of people on the list, closer to home, these are Ferranti people who occupied a thing called the Tin Hut. Now, let me explain the background to this. Vivian Bowden, who we met previously, had identified the need to recruit programmers, and so he set about advertising and recruiting a collection of people that he describes on the screen. I'm too embarrassed to read it out. But indeed, the group, once it was formed, has come down in Ferranti history and maybe the wider history as a group of really keen people who got on well, had a good social life, and made significant contributions. Now, the amazing thing to me, having spent some years in Manchester, is that these people who had largely graduated from universities in the soft underbelly of southern England, if I may say, would be persuaded to come and work in Ferranti's Boston factory. Here on the top left is one of the alleyways between huge blocks of factory premises. If you went into any one of those blocks, you'd see something like this. This is the machine shop, or one machine shop. There were other production lines, or places where they produced TV tubes, etc. Where was there suitable for a collection of maybe prima donnas, you might say, highly cerebral coders? So what Ferranti did is arrange to purchase a prefabricated building in aluminium that was one of a series of buildings designed just after the war to deal with the emergency accommodation situation. What we wanted were not only houses, but primary schools, etc. And the building that was familiarly called the Tin Hut was a building that, as far as I know, could have been used, and maybe was intended to be used as a primary school. That is to say, it had two very large common rooms in it for small offices and looms, etc. Made of aluminium, of a design produced by AROH, Aircraft Industries Research Organisation on Housing. And I think this building was designed by the Bristol Aircraft Company. I haven't a satisfactory picture of the Tin Hut except this little aerial view, which shows the Tin Hut arrowed on probably the only bit of greenery in the Moston site. Into this hut were recruited a number of interesting people. Those who know a bit about computer history will obviously recognise Audrey Bates, we talked about her. John Bennett, an Australian PhD at Cambridge, a significant player in Ferranti's booth from Mark1 and Mark1 Star. I'm delighted to announce that Olaf is here today. Olaf, would you mind putting up your camera? Ladies and gentlemen, a national treasure. And I really think, Olaf's come all the way from Somerset today, so really well done. And I'm sure afterwards, if you can spare the time, if you want to know some real information, in contrast to the pseudo information I give, then Olaf is the man. You may recognise other names. Vera became Tony Booker's wife. Dietrich Prince was the one theoretical person Ferranti set up, who in 1947-48 suggested that Ferranti should look at digital computers. The two people I want to mention are Mary Lee Woods here and Joan Kay. So without further ado, some anecdotes from them. No picture of Joan, unfortunately, but many people will recognise the picture of Mary Lee Woods and Conway Berners-Lee. So there you see before you, ladies and gentlemen, the progenitors of Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web. Mary came to Ferranti with some kind of robust prior history. Her degree had been interrupted by the war. She was drafted to TRE, War Service, back to university, where she got a degree. She went off to Canberra to work in the Canadian Observatory. So, you know, she was quite a person by the time she got to Boston. And there are three anecdotes in a way that I want to tell you about Mary Lee. And the first involves equal salary. Mary Lee, when she arrived, observed that the female programmers, of whom there were more than half in that group, were paid less than men. Now it so happened that not only was Mary Lee a robust sort of person, but she also shared a flat with Joy Baden, who worked in the Ferranti's personnel department. And with that sort of prior information, Mary Lee campaigned and got equal pay pretty well early on in the scheme of things in computing. Well done her. The second interesting thing about second to several is that Mary Lee, along with other Ferranti computers, found themselves having to work more and more nights on the computer. As the Manchester University computer got more and more used by industry and academics, Ferranti was pushed into the unsocial hours, and Mary Lee found herself having to program to stay late at night, and there were immediate management concerns about chaperones and all sorts of inappropriate goings on, especially as a male maintenance engineer would be lurking somewhere in the building. Well, Mary Lee, and greatly encouraged by John Bennett, said, no, they must work. So forget about chaperones, they shall work, and what is more, I'll provide a camp bed, so that if they have to have a little kick before it's their turn to want to be on the machine, or while their program is ticking away, why not let them sleep? You know, what's it all about? It's all about production. The final thing about Mary Lee was her perseverance in the face of engineering uncertainties. It so happened that one of her responsibilities was to work on matrix inversion routines for the solution of simultaneous differential equations. And some of these programs run for long times, depending on the number of equations. So a 3-hour run was not untypical. And would the machine run for 3 hours without a fault? Well, to start with, before it got more reliable, the answer to that question was seldom. And Mary Lee went to take no for an answer and put pressure on the maintenance engineers, and particularly we felt brave enough to have a word with Tom Kilburn, who didn't say anything, puffed on his pipe, but lo and behold, the Mary Lee's matrix inversion program appeared as part of the standard acceptance test. So, you know, a good person. Joan Kay was interesting to me, because I think alone of the 14 or so tin-up programmers, she was more connected with the engineers. She describes herself as a kind of plumber's mate, by which she meant that every time exotic peripherals such as line printers or magtape decks were attached to the Mark1 machines, Joan would go on with the engineers, write the test programs for these peripherals. And as such, she had 4 trips to Amsterdam, 1 to Rome. She eventually wrote test programs for Pegasus, Perseus, Mercury, married a Ferranti engineer. So she is one of the tradition comes out of the tin.
Can I add a little bit there? Joan Kay became Joan Travis
Yes, sir.
and worked for me for about 8 years on John Ives' basic
Basic
language
language.
project. And so, yes, we were impressed too.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. I must rush on if you don't mind, because we've got to film this thing soon. So, turning to Holland, Liddy joined Shell Labs in 1951 as a computer clerk. She joined a set of a group of 10 Arabian mathematicians who cracked away at Marchant desk calculators, working on mostly statistical analyses of lab data. So she was in position, as it were, when Shell ordered a computer, and she was among the first group of Shell employees to go on a programming course in the UK before the machine arrived. And when the machine did arrive, she took some part in, and an increasingly dominant part in the programming of that computer. In particular, Shell had got the services of an academic, no names, no background, but somebody who was imported to give lectures on how to program to Shell's engineers and scientists. Liddy and a few other of the Shell programmers observed that this academic spent all the 2 weeks telling the participants about theory, and they didn't get any programming exercises. And indeed, it was rumoured that the academic had never written a program himself. So Liddy says, can I be allowed to run the course? And luckily, management said yes. So she took over and ran fortnightly courses for probably 25 people at a time, and greatly enjoyed it. 1956, she left to get married because at that time, Shell people, if they were female and got married, they left. In Liddy's case, she was, they wanted her to stay on, and she was offered a job, but she said, sorry, I have got numbers coming out of my nose, she said, and so that was that. But here is Liddy, the centre figure here at the console of the Shell's computer. And I know all this because I'm in contact with her son, and some of the photographs I've got taken by Liddy. She was interviewed in 2001, and there's more in the background to this remarkable person available if you're interested. Finally, time's getting on, turning to Avro, AV Row, and they're set up at Chatterton, and Sheila Gray. I'm not sure that this is a photograph of Sheila herself, but knowing that, to begin with at least, Sheila was the only female on the in the Avro's programming group, it might be. Anyway, this photograph is taken of the Avro Mark1 from the other side of the console to the one previously. Sheila joined the company and found herself not only the only female programmer, but the first female to be employed in the professional grade of staff in a whole Avro company, which itself has problems about where does she go to eat lunch? Anyway, there's lots of little anecdotes about that. She was paid £400 a year, and a male colleague recruited at the same time with a second-class degree, not a first-class degree, was paid £500. Sheila didn't. I don't know whether she made an effort to get equal pay, but certainly it didn't come, or it didn't come easily. There's one story I like about Sheila. At one stage she had to write a program to analyse the result of wind tunnel tests. The Farnborough wind tunnel, which at the time was the highest performance wind tunnel in the country, Avro had a term there with its models, got lots of data about the effect of airfoil sections at various angles of incidence and speeds. And this data then had to be crunched to try and predict the effect on the airframe. So Sheila's program produced 6 coefficients, which were related to the 6 degrees of freedom in the particular model they had. For the first time, for the first set of data, Sheila thought that she'd better use the same set of data on with the manual hand calculating methods used up at that time to make sure that the results she was producing were in line with the manual results. And there was a discrepancy. And of course the aerodynamicists threw their hands in the air, laughed up their sleeve and said, these modern computers. So thus goaded, Sheila analysed their hand methods in detail and found that cumulative rounding errors on part of the manual calculations were accounted for the discrepancy. And thereafter, the digital computers were trusted. So, there we are, and if God could assist with technology, we'd have a short, because I'm incapable of driving, I'm sorry, we'd have a short film of an over Vulcan, and 2/3 of the way through, and we might be able to pause the film at that point, you'll see a very short section of the program being run on the average Mark1 Star.
It should be there.
Yeah, and Rod, if you wouldn't mind, pause it, go by the pause and go.
Are we on?
We just need to go on the go arrow.
There.
No, not that one. Go to the video.
Okay.
It's just the.
I haven't got it on the screen, Simon.
Oh, right. Oh. Somehow we haven't got the cursor.
We need to get back there.
We need to start right.
Get off full screen and look for the cursor.
Yeah. There's a suggestion, take it off full screen and look at the cursor.
Yeah, okay. It's getting there.
Well,
Then, are we beginning or not?
Is there any computer people in
Temporary computer people.
we might need to call Joe, the technician.
We presented with a different laptop.
Just hit
Try
return.
the key that does the right mouse click, just to the right of the space bar, it might bring up a menu.
David,
It did.
you want-
It's this one. But unfortunately, this is the one that's set up. It's not. Try and stay there.
Well, that's another guess.
We may need our
If I'm
technical
using
guy.
Windows, and you need to qualify. Try Alt-N, Alt-F.
I believe the technician Joe is lurking somewhere on this floor in this building.
We may need him actually.
Does anyone know their way about this building?
Simon, I can go and get him. How long is the film clip?
Well, I can fill in. It's only 3 minutes, but why don't I waffle or ask a question?
You have a waffle.
Oh, come on. Right.
Sorry about this.
It returns my view, it's got
Down to that.
Well done.
Yes. That's fine. And if you right. There's a couple of minutes to make you feel proud you're British.
That's like the first or the second test.
Only 3 days after its first flight, the prototype made a dramatic appearance at the SGAC display at Farnborough. Clark flew it alone. This 50-ton aeroplane could be flown single-handed. The production of the Vulcan had been planned from the time when the aircraft was just a pencil outline. 50,000 special tools had to be made to put the first squadron of Vulcans into the air. Each aircraft is built up from over 100,000 separate parts. Shown here is a universal rib assembly chain. Each rib exactly made has its place in the wing assembly chain. In this 5,000-ton rubber press, large parts can be produced in one operation, thereby lowering costs. And so the Vulcan goes into production with special virtues of the bomber. The Avro flutter and response simulators can tell aircraft designers precisely how their project will react to control movements or disturbances in the air when it flies. Here, the simulated disturbance to an aircraft damps down quickly. At a different configuration, the same disturbance leads to a nosedive. Added these days is the very latest bit.
I just brought it there because the rest of the sequence is only 20 seconds. But you see the console, and this might in fact be Sheila, isn't it? The next clip shows the screen with the dots of a running program, and if you know about these things, the dots, binary digits, that are brighter than their neighbours are the ones that are accessed more frequently. And you can tell at a glance something about the running of your program. So let's see if we can...
Digital computer, popularly known as the electronic brain. The problems translated into separations on a row are fed into the computer. Calculations which would have taken a month can now be condensed into a matter of minutes.
Yeah,
In this tunnel, speeds up to Mach 1.
that's it really. So if we could switch back to
Logically, the two screens are side by side, so you need to move your mouse right to one.
Right.
Right, one way or the other.
Two screens all the back there. That's meant to be exciting. Do you reckon it's... No. Right, back on the slide. Yeah. Not quite.
I think we're cutting it.
Well, we're meant to be there, but what I don't want to do is break his slideshow.
Well, let me just tell you what's on the last couple of slides, and hopefully you'll be able to see it.
Okay. If you're that close, go for it.
Well, it would help if you can get it.
Precisely.
I'm just going to say a little bit about what...
It's Alt-Tab that we're now on Alt-Tab on it. What we can't do is get the main screen back up.
Now, what did Lord Bowden say? He said the problems with...
Remember, computers only go wrong when you use them. Well done, that.
Excellent, excellent. Well done. I'll possibly build that. Right, okay, just a couple of slides. What came next? Well, two of the sites were really enthusiastic about prolonging the life of their Ferranti Mark1 stars. The one I've chosen to say something about is Fort Halstead, where a computer, transistorized computer, was designed and built by Fort Halstead, and a feature of that machine was that it had not only a console that was pretty well the Ferranti Mark1 star console with the CRTs and keys, but it would run Mark1 star code in addition to more up-to-date languages, particularly the people at Fort Halstead had invented a language called MRFAC, mathematics in readable form, automatically compiled. It was a bit of a side issue, but for the next 10 years at Fort Halstead, I understand that Cosmos and MRFAC were the main computing facilities. What can you see today of the remains of these 9 machines? And the answer is pretty much not very much. These cabinets coming from the Avro machine are installed in Scotland. If you go to TNMOC at Bletchley Park, you'll see a logic door and a twin CRT storage unit that appears to have been cut in half. And there are various bits and pieces, for example, in the Computer History Museum in America, etc. And that's about it. If you want more information, do email me. And there's a book to be published in the autumn, and I've got a bit of a blurb about the book if you're interested in that sort of thing. So, thank you very much. Questions?
Do you want to use the mic?
Well done, that man.
Thank you, Simon. That was fascinating. Are there any surviving programs and simulators for the Mark1?
Well, Martin Campbell Kelly, who's sitting in the middle here, had a simulator for Mark1, but that's died to death, I think it's true to say, your simulator. But David Link, well, it was written for in 1968. David Link, he who won a Tony Sale Award a little while ago, has a particular simulator tied to his demonstration of Christopher Strachey's love letters programs. And David tells me that he's going to generalize that simulator so it's available for the whole instruction set, more general purpose. And the hope is that when he does that, it'll be web accessible. As for code that we run, well, in the Bodleian in Oxford, there are some of Christopher Strachey's programs left, so no doubt enthusiasts will have fun there. It would be really good if somebody found the code behind Tony Booker's Mark1 autocode, or Trixie Worsley's transcode, or something like that. I'm not the best person to investigate that sort of area, but I think some diligent archivist could probably find interesting things to run.
David Link does actually have the source code for Tony Booker's autocode.
There we are. There we are.
It's actually mine, but
So there's a diligent archivist already on the job. Thank you, Martin.
it exists, and I did get it running again in the 70s.
Right. Well, that is pretty good, isn't it? Pretty good. So I'm sure there are enthusiasts in the CCS who would rise to that challenge, yes.
Fascinating talk, thank you very much. I was interested in the Cosmos.
Yes,
You
yes.
mentioned. Is that done as hardware emulator? And was that a program which ran on their Cosmos machine that simulated the Mark 1?
I imagine it was a little bit of hardware in the sense that the user interface had the keys, it had the look and feel of the original console, the tubes with the dots on and or some simulation of that. But clearly the logic of the computer itself was a modern, different logic, yeah. Because it had to not only run a simulator of the code or an emulator, had to run NERPAC compiler, etc., etc. But is Gordon Patterson right? There is a man here who, by way of introduction, wasn't originally the archivist at Fort Halstead, and I'm sure, Gordon, would you like to say anything about that?
In my head, Cosmos is... I'm Gordon Patterson from DSTL. In my head, Cosmos is the Mark 1 Star. It's the 10th machine that never really got on the list because it was, to all intents and purposes, running the same software that had been written for the Mark 1, which we called it AMOS. But just transistorized. The only big difference was it was operating in each of the 40 bits in parallel. So when they designed, they had a choice really. When the Mark 1 Star wasn't fast enough, you could buy a new machine, but the Ferranti machines weren't code compatible. So they thought, well, hang on, we just spent 5 or 6 years writing subroutines in the machine instruction set. What are we going to do with all that investment? And the idea came, well, why don't we just build our own machine? Because we know this thing inside out. Because anybody that had one of these, really, to get it running reliably, you had to sort of do everything yourself. So it was not an emulator, it was a a functioning machine. It was never publicised terribly well, which is a shame, but I think of it in sort of a Mark 1 Star, but it's long gone, I think.
Is this the first example of somebody doing this? It just seems extraordinary. It took such a long time before anyone else realised that having a compatible compatible software-wise with the previous one would be a jolly good idea.
Well, a similar sort of thing happened in Rome at the end of the life of that machine. The follow-on computer, whose name escapes me, built with the help of Olivetti, that had a similar sort of look-alike console, but chunkier.
The name is Chinak.
Right. Here we are. Would you like to say anything about that? You don't have to.
So basically, they had this problem of programs. So yeah, they asked.
Could you stand up for the benefit of the reader?
That's it. So Olivetti actually already sold this division to GE, but they still have like some kind of prototype. So basically, they are conserved in the Museum of Computing Machinery in Pisa. So it was some kind of supercomputer with like some parts that were left from the previous Ferranti and some parts were added by Olivetti. And there's, in particular, it's something that I'm going to show you next month. So, and it's like the physical structure of these parts were like a central part with 3 packets of electronics. So it was some kind of tree, so some kind of not so common at the time. Physical design.
Thank you. But it was about the same time. I just want to, if I may, just turn to Olaf. Was there anything you'd like to say to us? You don't have to, but you might. I mean, since you wrote the manual for the Mark 1 Stars input routine, radix 32 bits, and Olaf has actually reproduced the documentation. Would you like to say anything to us?
I wrote the manual for the Mark 1 Star as the instruction manual, and also I wrote the input routine for it, which was heavily based on the experience of Mark1, and obviously a little bit of the Turing input on the Mark1 featured in my version. I think it was probably the first instruction manual that was written for a commercial computer, because the Ferranti Mark1 was the first computer which was actually marketed in the world. And just to give you a little bit of introduction to why I got into computer work, I gained a very ordinary mathematics degree, first degree at Bristol, and I spent 2 years in the services. But meanwhile, we had decided to get married. I met my wife in August 1952, and she had a job in Lancashire, so I went to Ferranti to see if they had a job, thinking perhaps management trainee in the transformer division or something like that. And I was taken to the instrument division at Boston, which is about 2 miles away, and I was interviewed for the job of computer programmer before I had any idea what a computer was. So life is very strict on one. So I have to say that I really enjoyed my 2 years and getting on now. Looking back, I think those 2 years were very, very important to my life and informed everything I did, underlined everything I did. Particularly the logic, knowing the logic of the computer when you're programming. People don't know the logic now, but that was extremely valuable in everything I've done. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon, thank you for that. Could I add 2 things? It may be worth pointing out that the ERA Atlas, which we talked about fairly early on, is in fact pretty much one and the same machine as the Univac 1103, because Univac took over ERA quite early on in the 1950s. And one of the senior designers on the later end of that range was Seymour Cray, who I think will be known to most people. The other observation I like to make is about Mary Lee Woods, who, as we have heard, married Conway Berners-Lee, and therefore became Mary Lee Berners-Lee. In Ferranti, and it could only be in Ferranti, she was known as Mary Berners-Lee Square.
Nice and close.
The instruction set on the Ferranti Mark1 had some wonderful instructions in it, some of which even the modern compiler writer would give their right arm for still, which faded, although they lasted through to Atlas, they tend to fade after that. Was that a Ferranti design, or were those instructions in there, things like find me the leftmost bits and that kind of thing? Were they influenced by the GCHQ requirements, or were they pure Ferranti design?
The Mark1, as opposed to the Mark1 Star, purely university. Turing and Newman had some influence over the design of the instruction set because it was intended that, particularly Newman, would run programs of a pure mathematical nature to delve into problems in pure mathematics. And so that was his emphasis. Turing specified the random number generator, a hardware random number generator. I don't know which of those two specified the population count instruction sideways out, but that was clearly of interest to not the GCHQ itself at that time, as I've shown, curiously, but it was a background influence, I think, to their thinking. When it comes to the rationalisation of the instruction set that turned into the Ferranti Mark1 Star, a more rigorous approach was taken. There was a need to compress the number of separate functions so that they fitted into a single 5-bit character, hence 32. And so the more abstruse, we might say pure mathematical instructions were dropped, and inserted were instructions like normalize, a very useful instruction to anybody working on engineering problems, but missing from the first one. And the person, to my mind, who influenced that instruction set more than most was John Bennett of Ferranti. His first paper proposal for changes to the original Ferranti machine was circulated in the university. I think it was just before the first one had been delivered. It was quite early on, and was debated. Turing debated it and made some comments. Tom Kilburn made some comments. It did the rounds. The design was more or less fixed by early '52, by which time, of course, the first version of the machine had a few months life as a working machine. GCHQ, which became the first customer for this Mark1 Star, they were there discussing potential modifications, but actually they came a bit late in the day. If you look at the date of the meetings between Cheltenham folk and Ferranti folk, they were too late, really, to have much influence on the new instruction set, except insofar as Ferranti were willing to take out what may be, I don't know, the AND instruction and insert the population, reinsert the population count, make little changes like that. But basically, I conclude that GCHQ had little influence on the instruction set. What they tried to do, and this is not quite your question, but I'll say it anyway, the documentation that has come down, which is very partial, but it hints at GCHQ's advice that they'd like more index registers. Now, no reason was given, and you'd have thought 8 was a reasonable number to start with, but they wanted more. Well, that was turned down by Ferranti, too much more hardware to produce on time. They wanted minor changes to the instruction set. They wanted the ability to have 6 extra input-output wires, these are serial highways, for, presumably, up to 6 special purpose devices to be connected to the machine. Now here the documentation has gone, is black. I don't know the outcome, except it's hinted that 2 of those wires were used for an IBM electromatic typewriter, which was a common output device used by Colossus, etc. And the other was a gang punch, useful in punching large sticks of glass. That's all I know.
Thank you.
You said that the Ferranti was the most expensive of the group of machines you showed on that early slide. Do you have any idea of the numbers attached to that most expensive statement?
Yes. I thought actually I came the Ferranti machine itself, the price varied a bit, but it was between 80 and 95,000 pounds.
In those days, of course.
Oh yes, 3 million these days. By the time we get to the other British manufacturers, so we're moving on till 1954, 405, the BTM HEC 2N was about 20k, and the follow-on 1201 about 30k. I'm guessing a bit here. Elliot, the 402 was between 25 and 35k, according to options. The Elliot 405, which was much more substantial commercial data processing machine, was anything from 50k to 125k, depending on options. Juice was about 42 to 50k. The Pegasus, between 32 and 45, let's say 40. Mercury came a bit later, 100k. Leo 2, I believe, about 90k. Does that give you some idea?
Thank you very much.
I was just wondering whether the GCHQ machines were mainly used for code breaking or for things like analysing and correlating plain text.
Both. In the sense that I speak as a complete non-expert, but my guess is that with the use of one-time pads and code words, eventually it's going to be digits, isn't it? But somewhere in the chain, from going from plain text to encrypted message, comes words, you know, alphanumeric words, and no doubt there were captured code books, that sort of thing. Yes.
Well, so they might use the code books to sort of decrypt the
text. I have boundless admiration for the equipped analysts of GCHQ at Bletchley Park. They tried to worm their way in by the slightest of statistical biases, and they got there in the end. So whatever tricks they played, and there were a huge number of tricks, they usually got there in the end. That's all I can say.
Just a comment on your sort of diversity section. After Tim Berners-Lee gave the Lovelace lecture in 2007, I found myself speaking to his mother.
Yes.
And she said then, what you'd almost certainly say now, how surprised she was at how few women there were in the audience. Given the mix that she was used to working with.
Well, it's depressing. I mean, I'm the least qualified to talk about this, but I'll give you one statistic. At Manchester University, which had the first university degree course in the country, and we have a member of the first intake with us, the proportion of male to female, I think, Martin will correct me, was something like 26 students in all, of whom 5 or 6 were women, and I don't think that proportion has ever been exceeded. In fact, I think Roland's there, he might back this up, but I think the proportion of females has been considerably under that proportion.
I think there were more in the second year, actually. I think there were about 10 women in the second year of that course, because I joined then.
Right.
I do remember that at one time there was great concern in Singapore about the number of women taking computing courses, because they said, where are all the entrepreneurial men going to come from? Because their courses were largely dominated by girl students. Unique in the world, I think, because everywhere else was complaining about a shortage of women, and some people in Singapore were complaining about too many.
That's interesting.
Can I just make a couple of observations there? One is that I spent 15 years doing admissions to computer science up until recently, and it varied between 2% and one absolutely bumpy year of 20%, but that's very unusual. But usually it's down around 5-7%. The other thing is that the drop in the number of women coming into computing in general. My wife has done quite a lot of research on this, and the rot seems to set in around
the early 80s, and it's believed to be linked to the introduction of home computers. And what always is something else. But she's got a paper, and Bill wants it this afternoon.
Interestingly enough, we have a photograph from, I think it's the 1964 degree course that was done at Wolverhampton, and that was roughly 50% women. Wasn't the point I was going to make. The point I was going to make was coming back to the cost of the machines. I know at least one of the machines you mentioned there, the HEC, would have been considerably less powerful, I think it's fair to say. So you would have expected it to cost less because it had no main memory. Just from machines that were contemporary, and without wishing to start a war, do we know what was the relative performance of the Mark1 versus, say, EDSAC at the time? Again, without wishing to start.
There's somebody in the audience who may come to my help here, but the Pilot Ace among the British computers has been promoted as the fastest machine. Indeed, the clock rate of 1 microsecond, indeed so. But if you look at a contemporary benchmark of a basket full of scientific routines, the difference of final time taken running each job between the Mark1 and the Pilot Ace is not so great as you might think. Now, Martin, you may have something to say on this. Do you have any?
I think I probably would agree with what you just said, actually. When I looked, depends how you measure it, whether you looked at it at the cost or the speed. So that the Deuce was very much faster, but if you look at it as sort of pound for pound, you know, because it's such a much cheaper machine, it was overwhelmingly better.
But not to avoid a different war is that meeting our obligations to the whole audience that we finish at 4 o'clock. If people still want to talk to the speakers and outside, of course that's part of the process, but for those who've got travel plans, I think we have to go by our schedule. I'd like to thank Simon for a fascinating presentation. Names from the past, faces from the past, just absolutely amazing. And I was thoroughly absorbed. It was very interesting. The poor chap couldn't make a slight error of communication without being jumped on. Tied on every word, and that's a great compliment. I want to finish very quickly because, fortunately, Elizabeth over there did her own trailer. She's the speaker next time on Olivetti. Those who went to Pisa for the visit, we met her there, and of course she comes to these meetings. It's fascinating there, and I'm sure it'll be fascinating next time. Please come. There's one other thing, really linked to that. Our next trip away, Dan Hayden's in charge, 13th of April, we have a date in Namur, over in Belgium, and he's the man to talk about if you're interested. There is publicity in the normal places, but he's here today. And with that, and I'd like to ask for appreciation to Simon for a really fascinating afternoon.